Now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Amy Davidsen, who is the Executive Director for North America for the Climate Group, who will host the next session. I think we're going to do two. Here, I'll just introduce from up here, just quickly here. So I'm really proud to be able to guide this last and final session on innovation. We have two amazing speakers who really need no introduction, but I will anyway, just quickly. We have Andy Karsner, who's the managing partner of Emerson Collective. He's a space cowboy at Alphabet X, and he's the former Assistant Energy Secretary under George W. Bush. I'd like to welcome him to the stage. Just go in that. And then, of course, someone who just really is an amazing serial entrepreneur, innovator, and adventurer extraordinaire, and is the founder of Virgin Group and a member of the B team, Sir Richard Branson.
Thank you.
So great. We're going to get right into it since we have some limited time. Thank you for bearing with all of us. It's really been an amazing morning. I can't help but feel that, we heard from Secretary Summers, a bit about what's happening here with the U.S. administration. But I feel like, the U.S. administration, maybe they've walked off the climate playing field, but I feel like we're the ones that have the ball, and we're going to run towards the goal line. So this closing conversation is really where, to really get an assessment on where business is delivering on the momentum and the innovation needed to get us to achieve the safer, healthier, cleaner, and more prosperous future for all. But because we have Sir Richard here, I think what's on everybody's mind, and certainly on mine, because I was watching with absolute terror as this Category 5 Hurricane Irma came roaring through the Caribbean. And we know it affected Richard directly and personally, and I understand you were sort of bunkered down in your cellar as those winds came at you. Could you just tell us about that experience?
Everybody hearing okay? I think we're on. Okay. So we were told that it was going to be Category 4, then 5, and then in reality it was a Category 7. If you'd had categories going up to that, so over 200 mile an hour winds. And I don't know, how many people have been through a hurricane here? Quite a few. Okay, so I've been through one about every 12 years in the Caribbean. And in the last month, we've effectively had, 3 hurricanes and one very bad tropical storm. Anyway, on this one, we all went down to the basement, and you have 5 hours although we were in a concrete bunker, you're just screaming, howling, and then the sort of deathly hush as the eye comes over you, and you're not quite sure whether it's the end of the hurricane or whether you're in the eye, and we opened the door, looked down over the island to utter devastation, and everything flattened. 200-year-old trees gone, everything gone, nothing left. And I remember just feeling anger. The thing that flashed in my head was Trump standing out the White House after so many people in this room and other people had made such an effort in Paris. And just thinking, he should be here today. And then a few seconds later, the other side of the eye hit, and we threw ourselves back into the bunker, and it went on for another 5 hours. We finally came out, and I was sure we had 600 flamingos on the pond when we went in. I was sure that not one of them would survive, and there were something like 150 left, a lot of wounded ones, but I mean, unbelievable how, I just don't know how they did it. And we had lemurs on the island. The ones that survived were the ones that, we left out to fight for themselves, and didn't try to interfere with. And then the people of the BVI just were extraordinary. I mean, stories of people being in a house, the house disappeared, people sitting with their grandchildren and then running to another house and then that disappearing and then throwing their kids over a wall and the wall coming down and then ending up climbing down the hole that held all the shit from the rubbish and was standing in shit for 3 hours while the hurricane went on and still be smiling the next day. And I think the reason it's worth telling these stories is, they're getting worse. I mean, it's, and they're getting, there are more of them. And generally, I think us people who believe in climate change, we have to be careful not to exaggerate because we play into the hands of the skeptics. But Category 7 hurricane, it's unheard of. Tonight, I left the BVI reluctantly yesterday to come and talk about these things at the Climate Change Conference, knowing that a Category 4 hurricane, a new one, Maria, is going to hit Necker and hit the BVI tonight. With all, and Category 4 doesn't sound so much when you just had a Category 7, but Category 4 is bigger than anything that's ever hit the BVI before in history. And the last Category 3 hurricane that hit the BVI decimated, well, not as bad as what happened 10 days ago, but did tremendous damage. And this new Category 4 Hurricane Maria, is coming at a time when every house is toppling, or if it hasn't toppled, and the churches have got their roofs blown off, which are places where people go for shelter, and you have a whole nation that's been wiped out. Often with hurricanes, like if a hurricane hits Antigua or Barbados, half gets wiped out or a quarter gets wiped out. The rest of the nation can rally around and help. But here you've got a whole nation that's been wiped out, and we're not. The British Virgin Islands is not the only place affected, and by the time Maria's gone through, there's going to be a lot more. So. A lot of work to be done, and I sat down with the governor of the BVI on the way here, and the deputy prime minister, and just said, look, we're going to go to New York, we're going to get a Marshall Plan together. Don't bring in generators unless they're solar powered generators. We'll help you do that. We'll try to rally the international community to make sure that the BVI comes out stronger from it. And interestingly, on Necker, the only thing standing was our solar panels. It was they were registered to 140 miles an hour, and there they were. All of them. Whereas the diesel plant, which we used as a backup, was completely underwater. So good advert for solar panels.
And I think we can't forget that just before that, at the end of August, we also had Hurricane Harvey. And I know that Andy is from Texas, so maybe just have a quick update on...
Well, I don't think you can neatly sort of segment it and go, well, this one hit Texas, and this one hit the Caribbean, and this other one hit Florida. I mean, they're all fundamentally the same phenomena. And growing up in Texas, I would say, there's an imaginary, artificial sort of human line that separates the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. It's fair to kind of go, well, somewhere between Key West and down to Cancun, where the coral reef is more pretty, that's the Caribbean. And then over here, where there's big rigs, that's the Gulf, right? But we all eat the same shrimp. We all have Creole. And if we're lucky enough, we'll have good clean fish. That culture is common. All the Europeans came in and settled it in different ways. So Galveston was settled by the French, just like New Orleans and Saint Martin. And that means that if you grow up there, you're used to seeing hurricanes come your way, and you're basically saying, well, who's it going to hit? Is this for Florida? Is it for the Caribbean? God forbid, is it for Honduras and mudslides? Is it going to hit Texas? We're used to that. And so, I lived through Hurricane Gilbert, 15, 20 years ago. Could it become a Cat 4 storm? It's like you're saying, it wiped out, flooded the city. And So when Houston started to flood, I said, well, status quo. You build on top of a swamp, you block up all the capillaries of filtration out into the Gulf, you pave paradise, you put in a parking lot, of course it's going to flood. It's full of asphalt, right? And so it always has. But when the officials for the first time said, let's empty the reservoirs, because for the first time since they've been constructed, they will crack, and therefore let's deliberately flood parts of the city that aren't in a floodplain because the infrastructure can no longer withstand the impact of the storm, we said this is truly different. So 80% of the people in Houston who are flooded have no flood insurance. And what that means is whether it's these islands in microcosm that are utterly devastated in the Caribbean, whether it is what has happened up and down the Floridian coast, or whether it is the fourth largest and most diverse metropolis in the United States, right? We are looking at the largest opportunity of restoration and resurrection that can present itself. And I say that as an opportunity because opportunity is veiled in misfortune, and this is incredible misfortune. But we've only ever sold, since EVs hit the market, about 600,000 EVs in a decade, right? Houston will replace 1 million cars that are insured this year, 1 million. And now the question is, by what design, what opportunity? How do we think about that sort of change? And it's the same for all the houses in the long tail that's growing on the mold and infestation I think we could see cholera in a modern American city break out, right? So we're not done with the environmental tail of everything that's happened in these refinery and chemical complexes. And that's got to be an opportunity to sort of look, think, get with thought leaders, and sort of not have the wagging finger of I told you so, but the compassionate outreach of collaboration to say, let's rebuild this right, because these hurricanes aren't going to stop, and the severity isn't going to lessen, and the frequency is not going to become more intermittent.
So do you think these two hurricanes are giving sort of a shift to a new focus on the urgency of addressing climate change?
What? Go ahead, Rich, please.
No, after you.
Well, I think it's jolted thinking. I think it's shifted assumptions. I don't think it's exactly the moment to have is it this or is it that. But I think there is a broad realization that this is so different. This is the magnitude is so great that no one can afford to think of this in ways we thought of before. So that's why I say resurrection and restoration, because this is not remediation or rehabilitation. This isn't we'll go fix it, tornado knock down a few trailer parks. This is an entire city underwater, 4 million people. So there is broad realization, should we bring back neighborhoods, or should we let them return to their natural state so we have drainage and runoff, right? And at the same time, I think people feel the blessing when they look at these islands of much lesser means, where it has just been flattened, right? So now the question is, how do you bring leaders together? We used to say, oh, it's an earthquake just in Haiti. This is a regional phenomenon. And it's time to get all these regional leaders together, and the best in civil and environmental engineering and green thinking and urban design, and say, what do we do to build better? Because we're all on the fringe of this Gulf Stream, and it's the warmest place of the Gulf Stream, and these things aren't going to get lighter.
I mean, it's just so much better that maybe it'll take $5 billion to rebuild the Virgin Islands, and then you move on to Houston, then you move on to the Puerto Rico is going to be hit the day after tomorrow. That's another American country. They were helping us 2 days ago. Somebody's going to need to help them next. Billions and billions and billions are just going out for no return. Whereas with climate change infrastructure, solar panels, wind power, all these things, you can get a return, and it's exciting. I mean, we just got to. Governments have just got to set the rules. 2025, no more new cars will be sold in America that are diesel or petrol. From then on, it's all got to be clean energy, and countries are doing that. Scandinavia are doing that. Other countries are doing that, and set these rules and let the business people get out there and flourish. And in the same way that we got on top of the ozone problem, we can get on top of the climate change, but we just got to get on with it.
And what if government doesn't set the rules? So what can business do to increase their response?
Well, I think, I mean, business can do a lot, and we have to do a lot, particularly here in America. We have to work with governors that, believe in climate change and want to do something about it in their own states. We have something called the B Team. We're meeting this afternoon for 5 or 6 hours to discuss how business leaders can rally where governments can't. We've got a lot of very powerful business leaders, and there are a lot of other, the majority of 99% of business leaders are sensible people. They know we have a problem, and they want to do something about it. They're trying to get their own houses in order. They're trying to save their businesses money by getting their own houses in order. On Necker Island, by going clean, we were saving a few $100,000 in fuel bills. I mean, it's now got to that stage where it makes economic sense to do this, as well as makes good climate sense.
So we have made, obviously, some tremendous progress over the past 10 years, I would say. What do you think needs to happen next in terms of the innovation front? So what are some of the exciting innovations that you've seen, and what do you think is coming down the path?
So, I mean, the innovation is relentless, right? And it's not going to wait for whoever's elected and, which rhetoric set you prefer. Inevitably, there is a necessity that government rules form the boundary of a marketplace. But that marketplace has a rapacious appetite for integrating innovation as and when it develops, because it makes things better, it makes it faster, makes it more efficient, makes it more profitable. There are the things that people know and see and watch the edge of the trends: machine learning, the cloud, big data, artificial intelligence. That's fundamentally changing inflection across almost all industries. It's not sort of the tech industry over here and then aviation over here and then automotive over here. Everything is the tech industry. Everything is integrating sort of those trends. I was thinking about Richard struggling through traffic, as I'll bet some others did. I was like 2.5 hours from Kennedy Airport last night, right? But my week in California, I listened to 3 different flying taxi companies. Talk to me about, everybody's very focused on the convergence between, autonomous ride sharing and electrification of drivetrains. These guys are focused on lifting it above the freeways, and when is government going to devise a rule set so that we have fundamentally SUV drones, if you will, that are, basically electric powered, hovercraft, welcome to the Jetsons kind of thing. So 5 years ago, people didn't think autonomous could exist. Now every car company in the world has an autonomous center in Silicon Valley, right? Today, if I say that out loud, some people go, you can't have flying cars. That's nuts to think of a tilt rotor car that looks like a big drone and everything else. 5 years, look for it. People are going to be flying from SFO, to the football game, or JFK to downtown hotels without any of the distraction of helicopters and any of the sound levels, et cetera. So there's a ton going on to be excited about. There's so much convergence in available underlying technologies that are all hitting inflection at once. But let me counter that enthusiasm a little bit, because that's where I live, middle of Silicon Valley. We're always excited about it, by saying none of that would have stopped what we've already done in the ecosystems that are causing these storms, right? So we have to be as sensitive or more sensitive about how nature can perform as a mitigant. We have to be smart about our coastal marshes and wetlands, about our mangrove planting and the rest of it. So I'm on the board of something called Conservation International, and we had a campaign a few years ago called Nature is Speaking. This is nature speaking loudly and with great fury. And it's telling us something. And it's telling us that you can't just invent your way out of this. You've got to find ways to harmonize with the assets that nature brings us and integrate that into the solutions.
Yeah. And Richard, what are some of the
something which is sort of unfashionable to say is the consumption of meat plays a major part in the destruction of the rainforests and the ozone layer. And sorry, not the ozone layer. Sorry, oh my God, I've just been sitting in Necker for too long without electricity. And global warming. We've been experimenting with various virgin companies quietly, like dropping beef from menus and seeing whether people notice, and it's absolutely fascinating. The market research has shown that nobody's noticed, and and we're not publicising this. Sorry, so I shouldn't really be talking about it, because we want to do it for a year or two, and then be able to say, you've just been flying on our planes, you never had beef, but you didn't notice, you didn't mind, or didn't affect your experience. And if more and more people can do things like this, that will help a lot. One thing that the Rocky Mountain Institute and the Carbon War Room have been doing, which I think is absolutely necessary, is going into African countries, sending in a team of experts. I mean, we started with Rwanda, and going through their whole infrastructure of their country and showing them how they can save money. I mean, they can save millions and millions, tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars by moving to clean energy. And where's the easy wins? Where are the less easy wins? And it's been fantastically successful, the work that they've done in Rwanda. Now we're planning to roll it out into other African countries. Obviously, the Caribbean needs, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it later today, that sort of country by country analysis because these local governments, they're not experts. I mean, most of us aren't experts. Whereas somebody like the Rocky Mountain Institute, they know this stuff inside out, and if each of these countries can cut back to 30%, 40%, it's the only way they're going to get to carbon neutrality by 2050 is by having that kind of expertise come in and advise them.
Yeah. And so is there an innovation that you think, looking forward, especially in that context of, needing the advice that would bring it together and bring the people more involved? I'm
not sure there's one. We tried a prize, the Virgin Green. Sorry, I can't remember the name. The Virgin Earth Challenge, a $25 million prize to look for people who could, extract a lot of carbon out. Come up with a sort of slam dunk idea to sort this problem out. And that was some years ago. I don't think anyone's come up with a one winner suits all. But battery technology obviously is key, and it's very exciting to see the way that is moving in the right direction. Solar has already done fantastic leaps. Wind is already doing great leaps. So so I think in the airline industry, we flew a plane around the world, the Virgin Atlantic Global Flyer. It made 100% of carbon fiber. We then took Boeing and Airbus to Mojave, where it was built. They're now beginning to build, like the A350 is 50% carbon fiber. Boeing are building planes which is 50% carbon fiber. So the average airline, like we've reduced our carbon output by 30% thanks to moves like that. They should be able to go all carbon fiber, and that will reduce it further. So, step by step, these things are happening. We just got to speed up the process of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Andy, what do you think are some of the untapped potentials that are out there?
Well, I like, it would sound cliche. The greatest untapped potential is the human potential that's very latent right now. We have half the country being, not half, but a significant portion being deceived we're going to resurrect carbon as a main source of job creation in West Virginia or Pennsylvania, et cetera, instead of being usefully transitioned in a coherent and comprehensive way to the inevitable technology surge that's happening all around them, right? So how do we activate humans? I mean, from an Emerson collective lens, we don't really talk that much about saving the earth. We talk about saving ourselves, right? This is really about the longevity of our species, the quality of our communities, how we interact with one another as individuals, and we can't do that without sort of stewarding nature, and so we take that lens of justice that sort of drives our thinking, and it feels to me like all these things that Richard just talked about are the winds at our back, right? The technology, the economics, the opportunities on our side, but time isn't, right? So we have to act with some urgency in design and use some of this misfortune for the opportunity that it is to get people to think at community scale and holistically manifest a vision of the future. Not one that's at Disney, this is how the future ought to be, but rebuild these islands in the Caribbean, rebuild the core of Houston, make our places more resilient and green, and get community ownership and use it as a source of bringing us together. So the human potential.
And do you think there's an untapped potential that we're
These
missing?
people are getting hungry, you know. They've
Yeah.
been listening to us talking all day.
Okay.
I'm just thinking, but what do you think? Should we have a vote for food now? Not beef.
I was going to ask for one last question then, and then we will go for food. So just how do you remain...
I noticed when it said in my notes, it said, you got to go on stage, you got to do this, and we got to have some humour. So we're going to have to end on a humorous note. Come
Okay,
on.
we're going to end on a humorous note.
What's going to come out of our mouths?
It's dangerous.
Governor Brown said he was an extreme pessimist this morning. We've actually heard a lot about optimism. So I know you want to keep everything fun. So how do you keep it fun? How do you remain optimistic? And what's the...
Well, look, I'm a born optimist. I always think that, the glass is half full, and we've just got to make our optimism. We've got no choice, and it's great to have Governor Brown on side. Time goes so quickly, and we're certainly not keeping up with time. And so, we've got, this isn't very humorous, is it? I'll tell you a nice story. There was, in the Caribbean, there was 3 days after the hurricane of 10 days ago, I found this little girl sitting down, not under a tree because there weren't any trees left, but just sitting down in the shade of a broken wall. And she was 13 years old, and she had 5 kids around her. And I asked her what she was doing, and she said she'd set up this school because to teach kids, and she was the headmistress. And it was just such a lovely thing seeing this 13-year-old headmistress teaching 5 kids. So that's nice.
That's good. So I'll say one word of humor, because anything we could have said would have been raunchy backstage. So I'll actually I'll keep it clean for this day. The Scandinavians win every year on the best quality of life polls and all the indexes and everything. And my wife is Swedish, so there's this famous story that when they asked the Swedish man, why does the Scandinavians always win with quality of life? They said it's simple, low expectations. This is not a place where we can have low expectations, right? We can't achieve our happiness through low expectations. We've got to set the highest mark for ourselves. We've got to build on Richard's sort of beautiful work in convening to get all those neighboring islands to have a vision, have a plan, restore some hope, and do it with the highest kind of expectations. And I'm confident we can.
Yeah. And on that note, unless if you have one final thing to say, or you're good.
No, I was just trying. You were talking about wives and Archbishop Tutu. When I've had the privilege of getting to know the elders, but he's always cracking a joke over anything. So, and if his wife is giving him, telling him off or something, he comes out with lots of great jokes. But one of them is, there's these men trying to get into the kingdom of heaven, and there's a long line. I don't know if this works in America. Henpecked men. Everybody understand that? Okay. There's a long line for the henpecked men only line, and then there's another line for others, and this massive line, and then there's one man standing in the others, and St. Peter says to the man standing in the others, "So, how did you end up in this line?" And he said, "Oh, because my wife told me to." Thank you very much.
Good.
Thank you so much.